Just to remind you that since this is SABR, we do record all of these types of sessions. But having said that, we're extremely pleased to have three really great speakers who have given some time of theirs to be with us on Saturday afternoon, starting off with Ken Rosenthal and then transitioning to Zack Meisel. And our closer today from the Cleveland Indians will be Richard Conway. And I'd just like to thank them, the three of them in advance, for spending time with us and also be willing to do something a little bit different than the SABR norm. They have said that they would be most welcome to engaging with us directly, as in you are going to be free to turn your mics on and ask questions of them directly. So it'll be more of a back and forth dialogue rather than an asynchronous dialogue. If you do choose to put your questions in the chat, we'll be watching those also. But we'd like to make this as dynamic as we can, as an interactive as we can. So please, when you do come online, introduce yourself and try to make your questions as clear and as concise as possible so that we can handle as many as possible. Both Ken and Zack I talked to earlier this week, and they said, why don't we forgo any opening remarks on our part and just go right away to the Q&A, which I think we should all really enjoy. So for our first half hour or thereabouts, we'll spend the time with Ken Rosenthal, who needs no introduction. He's obviously one of the most noted and respected sports writers and reporters for Major League Baseball, working for The Athletics, the MLB Network, and Fox. And I think given the fact that we quite frequently see him at the SABR Analytics Conference, a very big supporter of SABR. So Ken, thank you again for being willing to be with us today. Take some time away from your very busy schedule and talk with us.
Pleasure.
So maybe since I'd like to ask the first question, if I could, and then we'll turn it over to the others. Just curious, every off-season hot stove league takes on its own characteristics. I'm very curious about what your thoughts are about not only where we are, but where we're headed in the remaining days, weeks of this hot stove league season, quote unquote.
Well, it's obviously been slow, a lot slower than even the past couple of off seasons, which were also slow. I obviously expect it to pick up at some point really soon, and we're going to see all these free agents sign. There's a huge number of them still out there. I expect the top guys will get, if not what they might have gotten normally, very impressive deals, and then we're going to see the middle class and lower class struggle. And there's no question about that. The market's flooded. And I don't need to tell everybody on this Zoom what market forces do, supply and demand. It's just the way the game works. The real concern, the overriding concern, is what kind of season are we going to have? And we're a month out from spring training, and the plan is for spring training to start on time, but I don't know that the plan is viable. And I would imagine most of you don't know that the plan is viable. So that is question one. And then the question becomes, can they play 162? And if they cannot play 162, what does that do to salaries? What will the owners expect as far as fan attendance for next year? What are the projections for that? All of this is so unknown. It has contributed to the lag in the marketplace. That's what is going on here. There's been this slow trend in recent years. As it is, teams have gotten accustomed to squeezing players by flooding the market and then waiting and waiting and waiting for the prices to drop. But the pandemic has only accelerated all of those forces.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Ken, my name is Tony Malika. What team did you grow up rooting for, and who were some of the early baseball heroes of you that helped you fall in love with the game?
Hey, Tony, thanks for that. That's a good question. I don't get asked that very often. People always want to know who I root for. I don't root for anyone. When you do this job, it's your job. It's not like that. But to answer the question, I grew up on Long Island, and I was a big Mets fan. My first favorite player was Ron Swoboda, the outfielder who made the great catch in the '69 World Series. I was 7 then. I don't know that I really knew what was going on. But Seaver and Kuzman, all those guys, Cleon Jones, those were my early favorite players. And then again, once you start doing this for a living, and I started as a sports writer in '84, that all changes. And you really root for stories and you root for people maybe, but not for teams.
Thank you.
Next question.
Can some teams get reputations for developing good pitching, good shortstops, scouting other teams? Can you tell us how that happens and whether it happens by pattern or just by luck?
It's a really good question. And in the Indians' case, just to name your local team, they clearly have an edge in the way they develop pitchers. They've brought in the right people. They've implemented the right systems. Whatever they're doing, and we don't know exactly what they're doing, it's working. So that has been something that over the years, teams have been really focused on, pitching and trying to figure out what works. Derek Falvey was a huge part of that before he went to the Twins. The Dodgers seem to do it well, other teams as well, but the Indians for sure have that. Now, that's player development. Scouting and amateur scouting is another arm of the game, of course. And you're right, there are some teams that seem to identify shortstops. And again, to localize it to Cleveland, the Mets, because they were, the reason the Mets were in position to trade for Lindor was because they had two shortstops to give the Indians, one of whom will play second. And then their top prospect is another shortstop who's coming along. Now, part of that is international scouting because all three of these guys were international players. Jimenez, Rosario, the two that the Indians acquired, Ronnie Mauricio is the other one. He's the top prospect. So that is obviously a strength of theirs. They're good at identifying shortstop talent. And I don't know why that happens, but clearly some teams are able to better develop some positions than others.
The Indians also are known for scouting other teams' players. They often get a really good reward for their trades that surprise people. Is there a certain kind of scout who looks for those guys?
That's the job for professional scout in general. And if you have good professional scouts and you're able to project either or both through analytics and observational scouting, that is a clear edge in this game. The people who can evaluate are the people who have an edge. Now, what's interesting in today's game is evaluation has taken on different forms. The traditional scouts used to be the main evaluators. Now there's a lot of video work, a lot of data work, a lot of other things that go into it. But in the Indians' case, and I'll talk about the trade a little bit because I would imagine you're curious about that. That trade to me, I know people in New York think that the Mets got a steal, and in some ways they did, because I don't know that any of the players the Indians acquired will burn the Mets. But I didn't know that it was a bad trade for the Indians. They got two guys who were second rounders, essentially, the last 2 years. Jimenez, I don't know how much of you guys have seen him play, but he is an interesting player. And I compared him when I wrote that day to a young Asdrubal Cabrera, not in terms of the way he hits, his discipline, or anything like that, because he's not really much of an offensive player yet, but his instinctiveness, the way he goes about it on the field, his presence on the field. He's an interesting guy. Rosario has been a disappointment, but was once a top prospect. So what I'm getting to is that I didn't think for a year of Lindor and 2 years of Carrasco at $27 million, whatever it was, that the Indians did that poorly. They were dumping a lot of money onto the Mets, and the Mets still gave them talent in return. Now we'll see how this plays out. You never know at the time of the trade. It takes years, but the Indians have been rather successful at identifying talent over the years. They've made some bad trades. All teams do, but they've made a lot of good ones too.
Hey, Ken, Alan, Papa, I really enjoy your work. You guys do a great job on Fox, and I love MLB Network. It's a baseball junkie's paradise. The thing that I'm interested in is, the Indians can't hit. I mean, it's clear we can't hit. We can pitch. You started to talk about the middle and the end of the free agent pool. Will there be a chance for a team like the Indians actually to improve themselves a lot by doing that? I mean, last year they got Domingo Santana. He didn't really turn out, but players like that wouldn't be available normally. What's your thoughts on that?
It's funny. As soon as you started formulating the question and stating it, I thought of Santana right away. Yes, they will be able to get guys like that. Now, what their flexibility is coming off the shortened season, and they're always financially challenged, I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's something that teams closely guard. But will there be players out there who might even be on minor league deals that you wouldn't expect? Yes, I expect that to happen. So while Santana did not work out really the way the Indians wanted, there will be other opportunities along those lines, and I expect they'll try to seize them.
Thanks.
Next question.
Are you in for a question?
Oh, I have one.
I think that
I have one here.
question.
Okay, go ahead,
Sure.
Krista.
I'm gonna try something.
Will the National League have a DH this year or not?
Great question, Kristen. Yes, I think that is going to be the answer. Yes, but it's part of a larger negotiation, including expanded playoffs and the 7-inning doubleheaders and the extra inning rule and all the different things that will be adopted for this season, which of course will be renegotiated when the CBA talks begin after the current year. I expect it's going to happen, but if you guys have noticed over the last couple of years, when the union says blue, the owners say red, and when the union says one thing, the owners say another. They never seem to be on the same page. I didn't give a great analogy there, but they do fight, and they fight, it seems to me, sometimes almost for the sake of fighting. They just can't not fight. So that's where we are right now. And it's a shame for certain free agents out there. Brantley is one. Ozuna is another. I can think of others as well. Oh, Nelson Cruz, of course. But without that clarity, even though teams think that there is going to be a DH in the National League, they're not sure of it. So, for instance, if you're, I don't know, Cincinnati Reds and you want to sign Nelson Cruz, I'm sure they don't, but in theory, you wouldn't do it because you're not quite sure yet that that opportunity is going to really be there for a DH.
Yes. One thing I'm wondering is the baseball's got to change. The game of baseball's got to change. It currently is too slow. There are too many strikeouts and too many home runs. What is the one big change that you would suggest that would really help improve the game?
There are too many strikeouts and home runs.
It's funny. I'm thinking about that myself right now. I might write something along these lines this week. And I was asking someone this morning about it, and he pointed me to a tweet from Whit Merrifield yesterday. And Whit Merrifield had a really good point. He basically said, if you're going to reward players financially for throwing 100 and hitting home runs, that's what players are going to try to do. And that is why the game is where it is in many ways right now. Now, there are other issues as well, but somehow they've got to figure out a plan, and it's got to be comprehensive. It can't be one thing or two things. Is it lowering the mound? Is it
Not again.
expanding the strike zone, shrinking the strike zone? There are all kinds of things you can think about, deadening the ball. But I'm with you. And most people who love the game and have appreciated the game for some time believe the game should be better aesthetically. It's not very appealing right now. And frankly, if you're a casual fan or a person that's just kind of neither here nor there about baseball, you're not watching because the games just aren't intriguing enough. So it has to change. And again, this comes to the union and in the whole relationship with MLB. They seem to have a hard time agreeing on anything. So the union is part of the conversation because, of course, the players are affected. And I don't know where it's going. The hiring of Theo Epstein is designed to help this whole matter. And hopefully he will have some ideas that they will take seriously, both sides, and implement. But I'm in total agreement that the pace needs to quicken. The action needs to improve. We need to see a better brand of the sport.
Hi, this is Sid Baranowski. I was curious about what your over and under would be for the length of the season. We muddled through last year with a few blips, but it was largely the owners. It seemed like they're pushing back to shorten the season so we didn't have to pay as much in salary. Where do you put the length of the season now? Because I still don't think fans will be back in force for quite a while.
Well, all right. Before I answer, it's a great question. I have to give some background. One is, so the players want to play 162. They want to play at a full salary. We know that. The owners do not want to play with empty parks. And frankly, they don't want to play with a percentage of the capacity. They'd rather play with full parks. So that, at least early on, is going to be a real challenge. We know that. So I don't know where it goes. And baseball people often say, both in the union and the MLB office, the virus will dictate what we can do. And to some extent, that's true. Whether Florida and Arizona are even viable for spring training in a couple of weeks, that's going to be something that dictates it. The inauguration of Biden, once that is gone and he is the president, he may have some ideas. And there, of course, is also the looming possibility that the national emergency will remain in effect and that baseball can try to use that, as it did last year, to enact a different kind of plan. I'm talking about Major League Baseball. So what is the over-under? To get to your question, I don't know, but I would say it's under 162. I have a hard time seeing how they're going to get to 162 unless, and I wrote about this a little bit this week, this is a plan that owners are at least kicking around, some of them. I don't know how many. Spring training in April, the season starts in May, you play through November, and you get 162 that way. Just push everything back till more people get vaccinated, till the virus starts to settle down a little bit, hopefully, and you have a safer environment, open to more fans. The problem with that idea, I can tell you one problem working for Fox, is that Fox won't want it because networks want to get the professional sports leagues back on their schedules. This overlap that occurred last year, obviously people wanted to watch and it was good and people wanted sports, but it wasn't healthy, at least as healthy as it could have been from the network's perspective. The calendar works for them. There's not much overlap. College football gets going in November and pro football is going by that time and baseball's out of the way. College football can go and all these things come into play. So I don't know where all this ends up. I do expect it's going to be a big fight.
And this is Joe. Could I jump in with a chat box question? Someone wanted to know your perspective on the possibility of an automatic ball being called if the pitch is not delivered in 30 seconds.
Pitch clock is one of the things that is under discussion. And we've been talking about this for how many years now, a pitch clock. And I do believe it would help. I don't know that it would be a cure-all. No one thing is going to be a cure-all. And that is something that Major League Baseball wants. It's something players have resisted with some justification. A question about too quick a pace, perhaps injuries, who knows? 30 seconds would seem rather reasonable to me. But where that goes, I don't know. But I would imagine that is part of the current negotiations to figure out the 2021 season. And I am quite certain it will be part of the CBA negotiations before and after the deal expires on December 1st.
Okay. Second chat box question, your view on the impact of the shortened 2020 season on pitching in this upcoming season.
That's a real concern. And when I say that, what I mean is we had a 60-game season. Now we're asking players perhaps to play 162 at maximum. And we know that when you have an increased workload as a pitcher, starting pitcher, but also as a reliever, it can take a toll. So I anticipate that we'll have expanded rosters again, at least to start the 21 season, the ability to carry more pitchers. But this is a real concern clubs have coming off the shorter year. And for minor leaguers, no year, and then ramping up again to play the way we normally played. And the other factor in that, there wasn't the same travel last year that there will be this year. Remember, last year was regional. And this year it's back to flying across the country and doing all those things. It takes a physical toll on players. You can't quantify it really, but there's something to that as well. And again, the point is they're asking more than they've been asking, or they asked in the past, excuse me, when they were just playing 162, 162, 162. This is a different jump.
Okay, questions?
Tom Stinch, I moved to Annapolis in 1971 to take a job, and I kidded everybody that I moved here and I'm going to be living in exile until the Indians win a World Series. I got a big laugh back then. After 50 years, the laugh isn't as funny anymore. I liked you when you covered the Orioles for the Baltimore paper. What lessons did you learn covering the Orioles and their owner that helped you in your later career here?
Oof. Well, that was a long time ago. I was at the Baltimore Sun from 1987 to 2000. And initially they were owned by Edward Bennett Williams, who was a Washington, D.C. attorney, famous attorney. Then they were bought by Eli Jacobs, who...
SABR bio of.
Excuse me?
I actually wrote Edward Bennett Williams' SABR bio. He was a really interesting guy.
Oh, completely a fascinating guy. People have written books about him. And Eli Jacobs followed him, and eventually they went into bankruptcy, had to sell the team, and that's when Peter Angelos became the owner. And actually, I was in the courtroom that day when they had the auction. It was in New York City, and Peter Angelos with Bill DeWitt, who now is the Cardinals owner, and Larry Lucchino, who went on to be the Red Sox owner, they were all together. Angelos was the main guy, and they outbid Jeffrey Loria, who of course became the Marlins owner. But what I learned was basically just how to cover the game at that point. And Peter Angelos is a singular individual. He's a force of nature. And we had our ups and downs, to say the least, mostly downs, because I wrote critically about the team as a columnist. I later became a columnist. And the most valuable lesson, this is really something that I take with me to this day, and I try to remember all the time, Tim Kirchin taught me. And Tim Kirchin was with the Baltimore Morning Sun when I started in 1987. Richard Justice was with the Washington Post. I was with the Baltimore Evening Sun, which is now no longer in existence. And Tim said right away to me, you're going to cover this sport, you have to understand it's a really, really difficult game to play. And these guys are the best in the world at it. So when they make a mistake, it's not because they stink. It's because, hey, they made a mistake and they're the best. So it's kind of just respecting players and respecting what they do and how hard it is. And I would say that's one of the main lessons I took out of it. And then just overall, learning the game itself, when you never stop learning. I'm learning constantly, we all are. And that's something that started back then.
And another chat box question, your perspective on the future of the minor leagues, given all that's going on right now.
I'm not as close to this particular issue as I am some others. I don't cover it that extensively. We have other writers who have written extensively about it. Clearly, baseball, Major League Baseball, wanted a more efficient operation. That's why they reduced the number of teams. They wanted better stadiums. They want control, all of these things. Now, all that came at a loss of however number of teams were eliminated. And that's a negative because minor league baseball is kind of the lifeblood of this whole thing. But from an economic standpoint, from a business standpoint, if you believe these operations are just inefficient and ridiculous and not aiding in your development of players, I can see their point. I don't know that they went about it necessarily in the way I would have gone about it. It was a little bit heavy-handed. They say it had to be heavy-handed, whatever. The question is, will the minor leagues still be as effective a feeder system as they have been in the past? And I would guess the answer to that is yes. One of my other concerns is what will become of the draft. Now, we saw last year what happened. They made it 5 rounds. It's supposed to go back to at least 10 this year. And that is very important to the sport because that's how you bring in players. And baseball, Major League Baseball says you can bring in players, just sign them for these $20,000. No. If a player's not drafted and is only eligible to sign for 20 grand, he might go play football or basketball or some other sport. So this is a concern that I have going forward as well.
Okay. Thank you. Next question.
Yeah, this is Stan from Toledo. First off, Ken, really enjoy your work. The one question I have is, what's the background on the Astros garbage can story that you broke? Did the player, Mike Fears, come to you? Did you go to him? What kind of insight can you give us on that?
Well, I never discussed process, and we haven't talked about this at all, Evan Drellick and I. And I'm a little reluctant even to share it here because Evan's writing a book right now.
Okay, all right.
And a lot of it's going to be in the book.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, to me, we did the reporting. The story obviously held up well based on all that happened. And I'm not, from a journalistic perspective, interested in ever revealing how we did it because we might want to use the same process next time or
That's fair.
work off that process. So I don't mean to be standoffish, but he is writing a book. I want the book to do well.
Okay, I got you.
I would imagine some of those questions will be answered in there. And it's a good question. In fact, some of it was rather interesting how this all came about, but we're going to save it for Evan's book.
And when might that book come out?
I don't know. I don't know the timetable. He's writing it right now, actually. He's in California. He went to California to sit in a room and write it. So he's working on it. And then I don't know the lag from the submission to the publication, but I would imagine hopefully this year.
And were you surprised that Cora and Hinch got hired so quickly?
No, I always thought they'd be hired quickly because regardless of what you think about what happened, they did serve a punishment, pretty significant punishment, out of the game for a year, and their names are tarnished forever. And yet they're both extremely skilled at what they do. And I knew teams would want them. I figured the Red Sox would want Cora back, and I knew a Hinch would be in demand as well. It did not surprise me in the least. And it also does not surprise me that Luno is not back in the game because he was not as well thought of within baseball circles as those two guys. Now, it's not because of the way he ran the teams. He obviously was extremely smart and successful. He did some brilliant things. Take the cheating out of it. But he just rubbed some people the wrong way. And ever since the story came out and the penalties were assessed, he's been fighting kind of to get his name back. And it has rubbed some people the wrong way.
And this is Stu in Minnesota. And with owners no longer giving the big money and the long-term contracts to players who are past their prime or approaching that area, is that going to be the players going for shorter requirements for arbitration or free agency in the next bargaining agreement?
Good question. I do expect that, yes. And whether that would solve the problem the players have with getting the money that they want, I don't know. But if you rolled back arbitration of 2 years and made free agency 4 years, I'm just throwing numbers out there. I have no idea if that's what they will seek, if that's what they will get. But players would start earning money at a younger age, and they would then match the earning power, their maximum earning power, with the prime of their careers. That doesn't happen now, right? We just saw it yesterday, the LeMahieu deal. Now he's 32 years old. It's pandemic influenced, it's luxury tax influenced, but he got $90 million over 6 years. Now the Yankees didn't want to give him 6 years, but they did because he wanted the $90 million. And that was a very unusual deal, getting back to your question, for this particular era, taking him to age 38. Some of the deals for guys like Trout and Harper, yes, they go that far because that's what it takes to secure them. But a 32-year-old getting that deal was highly unusual. And the teams and players know that's not the direction the sport has gone in. So yes, there's going to be considerable talk about adjusting the system in the next negotiations.
Ken, do you believe that there's a chance that baseball will leave some cities like Cleveland?
I do worry about Cleveland. And I worry because when I talk to people in the sport, it seems that there are some challenges there that are difficult. lack of a corporate base, shrinking population. I don't know the city and this situation quite as well as I probably should, but these are the things you hear. And it's funny. I wish, as you guys know, I used to work in Baltimore, and Baltimore is not really unlike Cleveland in many ways. And they have some challenges too in Baltimore that are similar. It basically comes back to market size. And maybe a different revenue sharing plan would help. I'm not sure, but clearly they have challenges there that other teams don't. And that is why it's a concern. I know people who work for the team, have worked for the team, they have this concern because we can talk about Dolan being cheap all we want. Maybe he is, I don't know. But does he have the same revenue streams that other teams in bigger markets do? He doesn't. That's the simple fact of the matter. So, yeah, I do have some concerns, and I love the ballpark. I've had some great memories in that ballpark. I love the city. I've got friends there, and I spent a lot of time there. And the first column I wrote, I'll leave you with this, after Baltimore stole the Browns, was a pro Cleveland column, and it nearly got me run out of Baltimore. The column was basically saying, hey, here we are in Baltimore. We're doing to them what was done to us. How do we feel about that?
Right.
So that didn't play too well.
No, well, Ken, I think our half hour is up. You said your parting comment was a very positive one about Cleveland. We want to thank you very much for spending some of your Saturday afternoon with us. And from the comments in the chat box, people have really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit, listening to you, and hopefully it's been an enjoyable experience for you also.
Absolutely. Hope everybody stays safe. Hope we have a good season, and thanks for having me.
Okay. We hope we see you again here. Take care, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right. Well, our next speaker has warmed up in the bullpen and come onto the field, Zack Meisel. As we all know, well, most of us from Cleveland know that Zack is the very well-respected writer for The Athletic who covers, at least today we can call them the Indians. And Zack's become a real cult favorite with our chapter. We keep asking him back because we enjoy listening to him, and he keeps wanting to come back. So there's something there. So for the next 30 minutes, we'll flip the script to Zack, and any and all questions about the Cleveland Indians are fair. So Zack, welcome this afternoon.
Thanks for having me back. It's just another ordinary day where I'm trying to follow in Ken Rosenthal's footsteps, and it's a daunting task.
So Zack, as I told them before you came on, that you and Ken were gracious in saying, let's just go right to the Q&A and forget us giving some opening remarks. But why don't we start with the Qs? Who has a question for Zack?
I guess if you think of something, just go ahead and talk. They can hear us.
Someone got a question? I heard there's.
I have one.
Okay,
This is
okay.
Oh,
go ahead.
This is Ed Baranowski from. I'm from the DC area and root for the Nats. I've always been quite impressed with how well the Indians can groom pitchers. How do they do that so much better than a lot of other teams?
Yeah, it started about, what year is it? We're in 2021 now, so like 7 years ago or so. They kind of had I think just like a come to Jesus moment almost, where they realized that they were separating scouting and development in ways where maybe they realized it would benefit them if they kind of collaborated more. And it seems really simple, but what that did was it opened the door for them to start this process over and say, well, okay, we know what we're good at developing. How they got Corey Kluber to turn into the pitcher he became. And they had other examples. And so they said, well, let's play to our strengths. And they looked at the scouting department and said, if we scout these particular players with these attributes, we know we can get them in our system, and we have a good culture here, and we can develop them in a certain way. So it really picked up steam in 2016 when they took Bieber and Plesac and Savali all early in that draft. And it's you can identify certain traits, right? Like they don't necessarily all throw 98 miles an hour, but they all had really good command in college. They were all college pitchers. And I think there's something to be said about finding guys who want to go out of their way to learn things and find ways to get better. And in today's game, that means a lot of data and studying video and things like that. So they're able to find pitchers in college who have these attributes where they know if they, a couple years after they draft them, they hand them a chart that shows, hey, here's why you should throw more changeups or something like that, that they think they can make those pitchers successful. So it's really just a collaboration between scouting and development that probably will become more prevalent around the league as time goes on. And it's a copycat league, and you see what one team does and you try to duplicate that in your own system. But it seems simple, but I think it took a few years to really take place. But you're seeing the fruits of that labor now.
Zach, it sounds so logical when you explain what they did with pitching. Why don't we do the same thing with hitting?
Yeah, so I mean that's I get that counter question all the time. I think it's not like they just snapped their fingers and figured out the solution to pitching and that was it. I mean, you have to adjust your strategy every year in the draft. And the problem is you don't know for years if these guys are going to pan out or not. So they feel comfortable in their pitching system, certainly because they've had enough results where it's a well-oiled machine. And you can see it, it's not even just drafting. It's they trade for a Trevor Bauer, a Mike Clevenger, or a Corey Kluber because they see these traits in these pitchers and they're able to get the most out of them. On the position player side, I think it's a lot of trial and error where you're trying to find that right formula and they just haven't been able to do it yet. So the next things on the list, two things you can look at the organization and see are number one, shortstops. Like they've struggled to develop outfielders. So I think now they're just saying, let's get the most athletic guys we can because if you can play shortstop, you can play anywhere. And so if you have a guy who can hit and he came up as a shortstop, if you have to eventually plug him into left field or second base, it's not a big deal. So you're seeing them collect all these shortstops and they're hoping if they can figure out a way to get enough of them to hit, they came up as shortstops, they can certainly pick it. So I think that's one thing. And then another thing is you're going to see a lot of guys who hit for contact. And in this game today, there's so many strikeouts, so many walks, and not a lot of guys who put the ball in play with regularity. So you're going to see prospects like Tyler Freeman, who might not hit for a ton of power, but he should hit for average and he should get on base a ton. And they have a lot of guys like that. They acquired a kid, Owen Miller from San Diego, who's a similar type hitter. You're going to see a lot of hitters come up who maybe contact first. And I think that's kind of a new strategy that they're toying with to see if maybe that's the elusive formula on the position player side.
Zach, I have a question for you, but
I think you might have reported this yourself, but obviously the Indians had somebody to watch Corey Kluber's workout. I mean, how seriously were they interested in him again? I mean, does he have anything left in the tank?
Yeah, so I reported they were there, what was that, Wednesday? I think it was more due diligence than anything else. There were a couple of relievers who pitched after Kluber, who I believe I don't know if it's official, but he's signing with the Yankees. I think it's 1 year, $11 million. It's a mystery. I don't know what he's got left in the tank. He's going to be 35 in April. Even before he was injured, when he got hit by that line drive in 2019, he was struggling. He made 7 starts. They didn't go very well. He didn't look quite like his normal self. He wasn't locating like he normally did. We know the velocity has declined a little bit. That shouldn't be a huge issue for him because everything he throws moves so much, but it's still a matter of from 2014 to 2018, he was as good as anybody, but he also pitched more than anybody. I think only Max Scherzer logged more innings than he did in those 5 years. And then tack on the playoff innings too. I mean, that takes a lot out of your arm. And it's just a question of how much juice is left in there. And I don't think anybody really knows that. I think he would tell you, hey, I was able to give my arm a rest for 2 years. So maybe that'll help. But who knows? I think that's why he's getting a 1 year deal. And if things go well in New York, maybe he lines himself up for a more lucrative 2 or 3 year deal after that. But if not, I don't think anyone would be shocked just because of how much he gave for that stretch of 5 years.
Before we ask Zach the next question, we're getting some background conversations coming through that's making it somewhat difficult for many of us to hear the prime conversation. So please either turn your mics off or limit your background conversation so we can all hear. Okay. Zach, we heard Ken's commentary on the Lindor trade. Could you offer your perspective?
Well, we all knew it was coming, right? I mean, I feel like we've been talking about it for, I don't know, since I was in diapers. It's an unfortunate reality. I don't know. It's always tough to judge because I don't know how much money the Indians make and lose every year because they don't open their books. They're not required to, and we can only make educated guesses. You can take what they say and you can take what you think and some of the facts that you have about league-wide finances and try to make an educated guess. But it is disappointing, and I know when you trade away a fan favorite, like, it's not just the fact that you're losing a player who wins Gold Gloves all the time and can hit for power and hit for average and steal bases and is a well-rounded player. It's that you're losing a guy that fans had gravitated toward for the last 6 years. And I think that really hurts. And, you know, I think it's frustrating too, because everybody said the right things leading up to this. I think everyone in the world who paid attention to this topic knew that this would be how it ended. And yet, like, the Indians did make efforts to try to keep him. And Lindor did say, hey, I'd stay if you meet my price. But I think both sides knew all along, like, that was probably never going to happen. And it was going to end up in him being traded before he leaves in free agency. So it's a shame that I think we're so conditioned to this being the reality, because when you have a magnetic superstar like that, you shouldn't be limited to just the big markets that will pay the price. You know, there should be a way for a Francisco Lindor to spend 15 years in Cleveland. There should be a way, and that holds true for every sport. The only sport that seems to have figured it out is the NFL, and that's because of revenue sharing. And so you can have Patrick Mahomes spending his entire career in Kansas City. But it's a shame, because how many times, I mean, you guys know it better than anybody. I mean, you point to a superstar in Cleveland that it's never a harmonious departure. It's always a trade or just leaving in free agency to get more money elsewhere, something like that. And it's disappointing, because then I can't tell you how many times I've already had people ask, you know, when are they going to trade Ramirez and Bieber and Nolan Jones, who hasn't even debuted yet? Like, it's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah. There's couple outfield questions in the chat box. One, who are your favorites for the Cleveland outfield this year? And second, any chance of a Clint Frazier sighting?
Probably not in Cleveland. I think they want to keep him. I'm interested to see Josh Naylor, who looked like Babe Ruth against the Yankees in those 2 playoff games. He's one of those guys. They have a bunch of these guys, which is just guys who have proven themselves in the minors. The track record is there. They've hit at every level. Josh Naylor, Daniel Johnson, Jordan Luplow. But it's time to prove that you can hit in the majors, because it's certainly a different animal. And I think this is going to be a year where they just try to learn as much as they can about Naylor and Johnson and Oscar Mercado and maybe Babby Bradley and Jake Bowers. So those would be some of the names for the outfield and maybe first base. I think there's going to be, you know, what always ends up happening is some of those guys impress and they prove that they belong and they prove that they should be part of the future. And some of those guys just kind of fall flat, and either they need a change of scenery or it's just never meant to be.
Next question for Zach.
Zach, this is Mark from Stowe. I've had my eye on Ernie Clement since he was with the late, great Mahoning Valley Scrappers. Do you see him at all as a major league middle infielder at some point?
Yeah, so I think, you know, they added him to the 40-man roster this winter, which is an indication that my guess would be in spring training. They have so many middle infielders. It's crazy. Ahmed Rosario, who was the most experienced piece in the Lindor trade, he'll start somewhere, maybe shortstop, maybe second base. Andres Jimenez, who they acquired in that trade, he could definitely start at shortstop. Maybe there's a small chance he starts the year at AAA just because he skipped that level. But then you've got Yu Chang and Ernie Clement, who I think would fight for the utility job. And Ernie Clement, he's another one of those guys, as I said before, who contact guy, not going to strike out a ton, going to put the bat on the ball. And it's like a lost art in today's game. So that's kind of what the Indians are banking on, some of these guys maybe helping this position player crop. But yeah, I think Ernie Clement will be in that mix for a utility spot on opening day. He's probably not the front runner. I would think Yu Chang would be, or maybe they even sign a free agent. But at some point he'll get an opportunity, whether 2021 or 2022.
That question from the chat box going once again back to the Lindor trade. Do you have any insiders baseball knowledge? Were there any other attractive offers the Tribe was weighing other than the Mets offer?
Yeah, what's crazy is Lindor is one of the top, I don't know, 10, 15 players in baseball, right? And there wasn't a huge market. Like, you didn't have 15 teams lining up to try to trade for him. And there were a bunch of factors in that, one being the pandemic and how it's just brought everything to a screeching halt this winter, whether just finances or activity in free agency or trades. I think there are still free agents out there. So some teams were a little hesitant because they said, oh, why give up prospects for Lindor when I can sign Didi Gregorius or Marcus Semien? And then also next winter, Lindor could be a free agent if he doesn't sign long-term with the Mets. Trevor Story could be a free agent. Carlos Correa, Javi Baez, Corey Seager. That's 5 really good shortstops. So I think some teams were hesitant and just said, well, I'd rather just wait a year and sign this guy and not give anything up now. So it was really just the Mets and the Blue Jays who I think were the only serious suitors. And it was just a matter of, the Indians, with all these big trades lately, they've been getting some guys who are major league ready and then some longer term prospects. And the Mets package fit that mold where you get 2 guys who can help you now, 2 guys who might be able to help you later, kind of lottery tickets. They did the similar thing with Clevenger and with Bauer. And I think that just kind of fit what they were looking for here.
Next question.
Yeah, Zach, Stan from Toledo again. It seems like this year's baseball, or the front office and the managers seem to have a very good working relationship, and sometimes the managers are just offshoots of what the offices are playing and thinking. And I was wondering, what's the relationship between Francona and the front office of the Indians? I mean, do they get along? Is it think it'd be a long-term relationship? Where exactly does Tito stand? And his health? Where are we at with that?
So are you asking like Tito and Antonetti and Chernoff, those guys?
Yeah, all on the same page, a good relationship. Where's it at?
Connected at the hip.
Okay.
I wrote a piece over the summer before the season started about what's crazy is Tito's been here longer than he was in Boston. And I don't think people realize that because it seemed like he was in Boston forever and they were so successful and they just had those prominent teams. But he's now been here. This will be his 9th season in Cleveland, and he spent 8 in Boston. And he's said it from day one. The reason he came here was because he was familiar with Shapiro, was familiar with Antonetti, and that mattered to him. He had a pretty ugly falling out in Boston that soured him on that sort of thing, where he realized how important it is to have a good relationship with your superiors and with the people who make the decisions on the organization. And so he worked with Shapiro and Antonetti in 2001 when he was in Cleveland, as it was after he had gotten fired in Philly, before he went and I think he coached in Oakland and maybe Texas for a year as like a bench coach and a base coach before he got hired in Boston. And the 1 year he spent just as a special advisor in the Indians front office, and he and those guys hit it off. And so they remained friends throughout all that time. And then they're, they talk every day. I don't know how common that is. It's also not common to have a manager be in one place for as long as Tito's been here. So I think that's helped. But yeah, so I wrote the piece last summer, where I was just exploring like how it all came together, because Tito's always talked about the reason I'm in Cleveland is because of Mark Shapiro and Chris Antonetti and what those guys mean. And so I really dug into that whole process. Like, what was it like interviewing? Because you were this 2-time winning World Series manager and you're interviewing in Cleveland, where of course they'd love to have you. Did you really have to like sell yourself? And Tito actually typed out a 17-page document in all caps for some reason, and handed it to Antonetti and Shapiro to show them how serious he was and all the things he believed and what he learned from Boston and from Philadelphia. And it's just like, they were so blown away by that, because it showed how much he cared and how much he didn't think he was, this larger than life figure because of his success in Boston. And I think that's what has made this work so well, is that they're all on the same page. And I don't know what relationships are on other teams, but I'm pretty confident in saying that there are few, if any, where your front office and manager work in lockstep the way those guys do.
How's his health?
His health is good. He's lost some weight. He's been exercising a lot more. He knew he thought he needed to lose some weight just to be able to make it through the rigors of a full season. So he's optimistic he'll be ready to go in a month, when spring training maybe starts.
Still doing the bubble gum, you think?
So I don't know if he's chewing bubble gum. I don't. But he gave up chewing tobacco more than a year ago now. So that's one positive step health-wise.
Zach, somebody would like us to touch the third rail today, and that is the name change, and get your perspective. And then the second part is a little more pointed. Let me just read it, because I think it's quite fascinating. The Stars have been thrown around, which is the rumored name of a potential Nashville team. Could the name Stars be a prelude of a possible franchise move? So first of all, your thoughts, and second of all, have you heard anything about the Stars comment?
All right, so I'll say this. I think I said this last time when I joined you guys, but I made it a point when all this started back before they got rid of Chief Wahoo, I was going to not have a strong opinion on any of this, because it's such a polarizing topic and I just don't have the brain capacity to care as much. And I know it means a lot to a lot of people, the name, the logo, everything, because they have memories that are attached to those things. And I get it. And I don't blame anyone for feeling the way they feel. So my standpoint has been, just don't screw it up. Pick a name that people can agree on and that looks cool. And that, they've said, like, we want to find a name that's going to be a name for the next 100 or so years. And that's a great tactic to use. Find something that people aren't going to be groaning about in a couple of years. So this always leads to the second question, which is, you look at the organization and the payroll is the lowest in the league. The name is going to change. You're going to have a huge new marketing and branding campaign. You're saying the ownership has sent the message that they're losing money and the pandemic didn't help. And you've got other cities maybe snooping around who want a team. And what is the viability of the Indians in Cleveland? So I can't give a definitive answer one way or the other saying this team will be here in 2024. The lease ends after the 2023 season. I know that's been a sticking point for people who just assume this means they're going to, be the Nashville Spiders in 3 years. I can say that I don't want to give away too much because it's something I'm in the middle of reporting and has taken a long time. And there's a lot here, but I know that they're at least have had discussions, have had meetings to where they talk about extending the lease. I know that the pandemic has certainly pushed back the Nashville timeline and what that contingent was hoping might be more of a distant reality. So I look, Art Modell, what happened. And because of that, you never want to say never. And I think fans in this town justifiably are maybe a little more nervous than fans in other towns would be. But I do have faith in one thing, and that is that say what you want about the payroll, about certain comments about enjoy him or whatever, but the Dolans have said that they are 5th generation Clevelanders. And you can say, why do you own the team if you lose money every year and you have to strip it down to the studs like you are right now? And but they do still own the team, I think, because it's so important to their family. And so I think it's important to their family to make sure it stays in Cleveland. So I'll never say never, because Art Modell said he'd never leave the team. And while he said that, he was making things happen behind the scenes. But I strongly believe that they're going to do everything they can to keep the team in Cleveland long term. So we're going to learn a lot more on that in the next year or so as they keep talking about extending the lease. But I think everyone just says, oh, they're probably going to Nashville in 3 years. And I don't think it's as simple as that. Hopefully that clarifies things a little bit.
Good.
It's a
Excellent
tricky
answer.
situation.
Next question.
Oh, I got one. Who's going to be on first base?
Are you asking me to do the old Abbott and Costello routine? Yeah, so it could be Bobby Bradley, who is ready for a major league chance. He's hit all the home runs you can hit at AAA. I think he's ready to show them that he can be a daily option. Gonna have to cut down on strikeouts, or at least put the ball in play more. But could be Jake Bowers, who they never gave a chance to in 2020. He didn't have a very inspiring 2019, but he's out of minor league options, so he'll either have to be on the opening day roster or they'll have to cut ties with him. Depending on what they do in the outfield, like Josh Naylor could end up being the first baseman. He'll start somewhere, whether first base or left field. So they have flexibility, they have options. I just think they have a lot of guys who have some upside, but we haven't seen it yet. And so there's going to have to be some trial and error while you figure out who sticks and who doesn't.
Exact question about that. Ken Rosenthal, when he was on, I asked him a similar question about players that probably won't get signed for very much. In normal years, they might get a 3-year deal. Now they're going to get a 1-year deal, maybe even a minor league deal. Do you think the Indians can strike gold with something like that? And if they do you think they'll spend the money?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of teams that are sitting back right now and saying, it's already mid-January and almost nobody is signed. So imagine the deals we can get in another few weeks. The Indians are certainly thinking that way. I think every smart team would think that way. But because of that, if everybody is fighting for the same good deal, it's probably not going to be as good of a deal as you would want it to be. So at some point, there has to be some momentum in free agency. Look, Chris Antonetti said the Indians will reinvest what they saved on Lindor and Carrasco, which is about $32 million for 2021. But
do you think they'll spend all 32, or do you think just a portion of?
I'm skeptical of that. I think they'll sign somebody, but you also look at this roster and it's weird. It's at some point you have to learn about the young players. Mm-hmm. You have to give Daniel Johnson a chance. You're going to give Nolan Jones a chance at some point this year at some position. You don't want to block him. You want to see if Naylor is legitimate. You want to see if Bobby Bradley can prove himself, or else you end up with Jesus Aguilar, Gio Urshela, Yandy Diaz, guys who you probably wish you would have given more leash to, but you cut ties with them and they went and prospered somewhere else. So it's tough. Like, you could sign a free agent outfielder. There's plenty out there, or you could trade for someone like Andrew Benintendi of the Red Sox. And in doing so, you get someone for a couple of years, but at the same time, are you blocking somebody that you really need to find out about? So it's a tricky balance. I think they'll add somebody to the position player side. I don't know if it'll be infield or outfield, but I do think there will be a lot of guys, and maybe it's like relievers fit into this category where it's like February 24th. Spring training games are about to start. Players are really getting antsy because they want home and they want to have a normal season. And so you can get some bargains then, and maybe you can just patch together the very end of your roster that way. But it's just, they're in a weird spot where at some point you almost have to like go through growing pains to figure out what you're going to look like in 2022 and 2023. And if you don't do that now, you're just kind of putting off the inevitable.
We got time for maybe one more question for Zach.
I have a question. The Indians outfield is so bad, but you look at, they really need a center fielder, and they've been playing Mercado there. He had a good rookie year, but his sophomore year last year was horrible. And generally, players who have bad sophomore years show that they're not a major league player, and they don't have much of a career if they don't bounce back, and very few do. If we don't have Mercado in center field, who's a good defensive center fielder? Bradley Zimmer can't hit major league pitching, even when he can stay healthy. So it's what can they do out there that can get a decent defensive fielding center fielder who can hit? Actually, that's true for all three positions in the outfield.
Yeah, you're painting a picture full of sunshine and rainbows, huh? I mean, the outfield was statistically one of the worst in Major League history last year. And so I think that's why they want to see what Daniel Johnson and Josh Naylor can do. Maybe you play Franmil Reyes out there. It can't possibly be as bad as it was last year. I think with Mercado, they're willing to make an exception and give him another chance to prove he belongs. Because one, last year was weird for everybody. You played the same teams over and over. You didn't have a normal spring training and ramp up. You didn't have fans in the stands. The travel was weird. Protocols were weird. Everything was off. So I think teams are cautious about putting too much stock into 2020 results individually. And with him, he bounced back and forth between the alternate site a couple times. It's not like he could go down and face AAA pitching in a real minor league setting and figure things out that way. It was so different. And also, I mean, Delino DeShields was taking away some of his at-bats. So I think they're willing to forgive his 2020, but he's going to have to prove 2019 was legitimate. The thing that helps him is, like you alluded to, there's not much competition. The only other guy who can play center field in the organization who's ready for it is Bradley Zimmer. And if he's not healthy, or, I mean, he's either been unhealthy or not hitting, and that's not a good combination. So it's possible maybe that's somewhere they would address in free agency just to give Mercado some competition. But I do think they're willing to give him one more chance to prove that he can handle the center field spot. And if he can't, they know that they have to go back to the drawing board.
Zach, why don't we throw one last question at you in the time we have left? As you get off the stage, how are you feeling today, January 16th, about the Tribe's 2021 season, especially given what the White Sox have done and to some extent what the Twins are doing?
So this is for the first time in, I don't know, 5-6 years. It's a year where I think there are a huge wide range of possible outcomes, where it seemed like the last 5 years or so, like even if things went wrong, they were still gonna have a winning record and at least be in contention. This year, it's interesting. I mean, the pitching staff is young and really talented, right? Like, I'm really excited to see what Plesac and Savali can do in a full season and what Tristan McKenzie can do. They really like Cal Quantrill, and he might be in the starting rotation. Logan Allen was a top 100 prospect. Like, they have so much pitching. The bullpen, we finally get to see Emmanuel Clase, get to see James Karinchak for 162 or however many games they play. But all those guys I just mentioned are really young. So there could be some growing pains because it's just, that happens with young players. You never know who's going to take a step forward, who might have a hiccup or two. How many times did we see that with like Danny Salazar, even Carlos Carrasco? It took him a few years to figure it out. So they certainly have that on the position player side too, where it seems like everybody outside of Jose Ramirez is young and needs to prove themselves. So because of that, I wouldn't be surprised if they won 75 games. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 85 games. I wouldn't be surprised if they were in contention for a playoff spot, depending on how many playoff teams they're going to have. And I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't in contention and it was just play the young kids, get those growing pains out of the way and figure it out so that in 2022, they'll be better off. There's a lot of excitement about players we've heard about for years who will finally debut or get a real opportunity. But because of that, I think expectations, it's okay if you temper them because it could be a year full of growing pains and learning and, you know, something that this team hasn't really done in quite a while.
Well, Zach, with that, we'll let you go today. Thank you for spending some of your Saturday afternoon with us. As always, it's been very insightful and enjoyable, and we hope you gained a measure of enjoyment too in spending some time with us.
Always a pleasure. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, we turn to our closer today, and it's a closer by committee. As I indicated in the email I sent to you, we had planned on having Clint Longenecker talk about Indian scouting from the Indians front office. Unfortunately, very sadly, Clint's grandmother passed away, and today is her funeral. So please keep him and his family in your thoughts and prayers. But we have another outstanding closer that Clint helped us get, and a person I had a chance to meet and get to know a little bit this week, Richard Conway, who is the Assistant Director of International Scouting. Richard has a fascinating background, including working for a while with the Orioles. And he's not only a U.S. citizen, but a Canadian citizen. Interesting little personal spin there for a moment. And Richard is going to spend just a few minutes telling us about how the tribe does international scouting in normal times and in COVID times. And then he will open up the rest of the time for Q&A. So with that, Richard, welcome.
Joe, thanks so much. I appreciate it, and appreciate everyone jumping on the call today. I'm excited to be here with you guys. So like Joe said, I'm happy to give a quick, 2-minute brief rundown of the international scene in general. Some of it may be repetitive, so I apologize if some of you already have some of this information, but just wanted to sort of set the stage a little bit with what the international looks like compared to the domestic draft side of things in the amateur scouting world. And then I'll leave the rest of the time for you guys to jump in and ask questions. So, which is actually an interesting time just because yesterday was the opening of the international signing period. So it's a timely time to talk about international for us. We have scouts on the ground in the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Panama, and Dominican Republic and Venezuela are really where the bulk of the international signings come from. When they're 16 more or less, they become eligible to sign on with major league clubs. All 30 clubs have academies located in the Dominican, which is like everyone's sort of center for international operations. And that's where they begin their careers once they sign on with a major league club. Now it's a little weird because this signing period before COVID opened up every July 2nd. So July 2nd was the day everyone signed their contracts. However, in the industry, it's trended to the direction that clubs would actually have verbal agreements that 99% of the time would carry over, but up till 2 years maybe before they actually sign their contracts. So when the kids are 13 or 14 years old, they had agreements set with clubs to sign their contracts on their eligibility of July 2nd. So we, and along with the other 29 clubs, have been, getting to know players that we signed yesterday for the past 2 or 3 years. So it's a really long process and sort of different than the draft where they, a year at a time. And then the other thing important to mention, I thought, would be just that MLB allocates about $6 million on average to each club to spend each year. A little bit varying just depending on market size. So the Indians have a little bit more money to spend than the Yankees, for example, just to balance it out a little bit. But that's the general gist of things. There are other countries that are part of the market as well outside of Latin America that are Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Australia, China, Nicaragua. Back in Latin America, all those smaller countries that have fewer players but still have that part of the market. So most of the attention and energy is focused on the Dominican Republic and Venezuela, just because the quantity of players coming out of there. But it is a wide-ranging market and challenging to say the least. So if I'm sure I left something out, so please, I'll open it up to you guys at that and sort of see what comes to mind for you guys. Any questions you guys might have.
Richard, I don't know if you were there when Cleveland signed Yandy Diaz a couple of years ago, but I'm always interested in the Cuba players, and how does it work differently, both in terms of money available or other things with Cuba as opposed to Dominican Republic?
Yeah, great question. So I was not here. I actually started 5 years ago. So I wasn't here for when Yandy signed. I think it was a little bit before that. But it's a great question because Cuba is such a different part of the market where teams are not actually allowed to go to Cuba to scout, and you're not allowed to sign players out of Cuba. So they actually have to defect to and then gain residency in another country like Mexico or the Dominican, and then get free agency. Sort of like Yoelqui Cespedes, who signed yesterday with the White Sox. He's from Cuba. Yoenis Cespedes' brother or half brother, I think it was. So he actually gained residency somewhere in another country, then became available to our teams. But he was part of the same budget that the White Sox had to sign any 16-year-old Dominican or Venezuelan kid. And the one difference there is if the player has played for 6 or more seasons in a professional foreign league and is at least 25 years old, he now becomes a major league free agent that is not related to the cap that we're given in the international system. So he could sign a major league deal theoretically with any team.
Richard, as you look at these players, how much hard data are you able to get in evaluating them? Could you talk a little bit about hard data versus, say, visual data versus stories of whatever? What kinds of information do you use to evaluate them?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. So we have 7 guys that work for us in the Dominican Republic. We have another 5 people in Venezuela that live there. Each of them have their geographical area to cover, and they're responsible for gathering information on the players and the academies that are in their area. Similar to the Ohio, whoever's an area scout in Ohio for a team has to cover Ohio State and, get to know those players or high schools in Ohio. So internationally, it's a little different because there aren't colleges and there aren't high schools and there aren't publicly available, box scores for you to sort of download and add into your system and sort of use to make your decisions. So instead, it's a lot of makeshift games where one academy maybe plays against another academy. There's no official score. It's on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. If it rains, they'll move it back. The next day, it's a little bit, fluid, to say the least. So we have to actually collect our own information and build our own sort of database of stats, if you will. And that goes for collecting biographical information as well as getting to know the players off the field, getting to know them on the field. We collect a ton of video. If anyone wants to know a little more about the COVID protocols, just because of inability to travel and get out and see players as much, video has become an extremely important factor in our ability to get to know players remotely. So
how big of a staff do you have doing these things you're describing to us?
Yeah, so we have the 7 people in the Dominican that live in the Dominican and are responsible for the areas down there. Another 5 in Venezuela, 1 in Panama, and 1 in Japan right now. And then we have myself. I have a colleague who's also another assistant director in the office, and our boss, who's our VP of international scouting. Plus, we have a coordinator who essentially jumps around to wherever we need to go and helps out. So it's a fairly robust, probably a little bit bigger than average overall, I would say, but not far off.
Question from Boston. Hello. Oh.
Hi, Michael.
Yep.
Oh, Richard.
I was wondering, your 5 guys in Venezuela, are you all at all concerned about them being in a place where we keep hearing that it's pretty dangerous to be there, especially considering young talent and money?
Yeah, really a fair question. All those guys are tremendous people, tremendous workers, tremendous scouts. And every day we're concerned about their well-being. You know, they have their families down there. They know the area. They know how to get around and how to make it work. But you're absolutely right. You know, it's a tough situation. There's always complications, political complications. Simply getting players to fly from Venezuela and, you know, driving around, it can be dangerous depending on what's going on. We never ask those guys to, you know, put themselves in danger, you know, just to see a player, for example. Like, we would never ask our scouts to do that. You know, their lives and their families come first and foremost, and it's a difficult country sometimes to work in. So those guys do a tremendous job, and I think they know that we would never ask them to put themselves in danger in you know, to do their job. So, you know, that's a great question, though. It's a tough situation. We always have to work around that challenge.
A couple of questions. Am I in?
Hi, Richard.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, a couple of questions. One regarding Cuba. With a new administration, we're more likely to have friendlier relations, and that should help. The other one has to do, what's going on with Mexico? Why don't we ever get anything out of Mexico? I know there's some historical reason, but I'd appreciate it if you'd explain.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the Cuba part first, because it is affected by the political atmosphere, I guess. And there was a point actually a few years ago where we thought we were going to get access to Cuban players and be able to start that relationship. So we'll see. We'll have to see, I guess, what changes, if anything, with regards to Cuban relations that might open things up or might not, or change things in any way. So I don't know much more than that. We'll just sort of have to see what MLB ends up doing and with what they're allowed to do with Cuba. In terms of Mexico, yeah, there are a lot of good prospects that come out of Mexico every year. You know, maybe 15 or so. So it's not the biggest marketplace. It's a little bit complicated compared to the normal Dominican and Venezuelan signs, because a lot of those players are affiliated with Mexican professional teams. And so there's different rules and regulations around who you can start scouting and when you can scout them and who you have to go through to be able to gain access to them. And then even with the signing bonuses, there's some other complications. And since we don't have a scout in Mexico, and it's a very relationship based market, we haven't put as much time in there. And as you know, some other teams have. I think about like half the teams have a scout in Mexico, and we've seen some of their players as they've come out of Mexico and showcased in San Diego oftentimes, or in Tijuana when we have Dominican players that go to Tijuana, for example. So we see some of those guys. We haven't yet forayed into spending money in that market though yet.
Hi, Richard. Just wondering what your thoughts were on Angel Ganao. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, and if you could give some background on him.
Yeah, Angel Ganao. We're really excited for the rest of you guys. In case you hadn't heard, he's one of the guys that signed yesterday in the Dominican Republic. He's an amazing kid, really bright, switch hitting infielder who actually participated in the Little League World Series back in 2017 in the States, which is really cool. If you search his name on Google and just sort of look up Little League World Series, he's got videos and stats from back then. So we've known him for quite a while. And yesterday is the final, his sort of day of celebration where he entered the organization. We're super excited to have him and see what he can be. Really young, he's grown. We've watched him grown up even in the 1 or 2 years that we've had him, involved prior to signing, and gotten to know him really well. So he's really exciting. He's gotten bigger, he's gotten stronger, and he's always put the bat on the ball and is pretty athletic and super bright. So like a lot of positives and to be excited about there.
Richard, I was going to ask, what do you know about or think about European baseball?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny you ask. I grew up in Brussels, in Belgium, so I played a little bit over there, but obviously not good enough to be pro. And there is baseball there. A lot of players in the Netherlands, in Germany, Italy, a little bit in Belgium, but it's a little different. In the sense that if you're a Dominican kid who's 12 years old, your life becomes playing baseball. you're not necessarily going to school every day. Most of them are not. So you're training way more than what the typical even American kid, or for that matter, European kid with, you know, your job and your life is playing baseball. And so they train it a lot more. And that probably doesn't give an advantage to the European kid who's in school and doesn't have necessarily the same baseball resources. So not saying that there aren't good players in Europe, there are. And as well, they may need more time to develop, which makes them a little riskier for a big league team to invest in them. And at the same time, European kids probably have more options in terms of education, so they have other decisions to make, whereas a Dominican kid oftentimes, unfortunately, doesn't necessarily have the option to go to school after he graduates from high school, for that matter, if he graduates from high school. And ideally that changes in the future in terms of, you know, in terms of education initiatives in the Dominican and Venezuela, so that these kids are getting school, and each team does prioritize getting them their education once they sign. But at the same time, compared to European and other non-Latin American countries, it can be tough to compete because they have to do what's best for their lives. And, you know, taking a chance in baseball sometimes may not be the right decision, but it is a great question. And you know, there are some good players. You know, Max Kepler's come out of there, super athletic, unbelievable player too. And he's from Germany. So there are good players out there.
Richard, we had a question from the chat box. Is there one trait you look for regarding an international prospect, in particular things like speed, baseball IQ, hand-eye coordination? What trait or traits are you looking for?
I think the answer is all of those things. Those are all good things. So yeah, it's tough to really, you know, boil it down to one thing. I think, you know, like you said, you know, baseball IQ, speed, you know, all those things are good. And every player has sort of got a different combination of, you know, hitability, defense, if they're a pitcher, you know, what's kind of stuff and velo they have, and off-field makeup, how, you know, who they are as a person, how hard they work, what's their experience in baseball and the games. So like all those things combine to sort of sum up the profile of a player. And it's really tough. It's never one thing, you know. It's if someone's really fast, you know, if you don't hit, you're not going to be able to use your speed that much. And if you're a really smart kid, but you can't really play defense anywhere, it's going to be tough too. So it is really a combination, and you sort of have to get the whole picture of a player just as you would in any other country. So the one thing that's probably the biggest difference that you might think about is that they're 15 years old, 16 years old, right? I don't know about you guys, but when I was 15 or 16, I didn't look like physically like I am now. Not that I'm physical by any means, but they are, you know, have a lot of growing left to do. And so that's one factor that keeps taken into account. Like what will they look like? What will their bodies allow them to do in 5 or 6 years from now when they're 20?
When you're doing that scouting, how do you, or can you, or do you look at, I'll call it human element? How will this young person transition from where he is to the United States, a different country, a different culture, et cetera? How do you relate to that dimension?
Yeah, that's an unbelievably important topic. And we actually have resources in our organization across all the levels that are specifically dedicated to that. We have life skills coaches, we have performance coaches that are focusing on the mental aspect of the game. And learning English is huge. Like imagine coming over to the US and not being able to order food at McDonald's or a restaurant, you know. Those kind of things add stress off the field that make it really difficult to focus and perform on the field. And so those are really important, and immediately, even before they're signing, you know, and especially once they sign, like those guys are thrown into English classes, education classes, where they're learning about how to, like how things are different maybe culturally in the Dominican compared to the US. Because there are, as with any country, and even within a country, there are significant differences in culture and how to behave and grow up, and keeping in mind that these kids are teenagers and that they're learning, even a teenager in the US would have to learn, or Canada for that matter, would have to learn, you know, how to grow up and become an adult and treat people with respect and work and be a functioning member of society at the same time as trying to be a professional baseball player. So it adds another aspect. with the language and cultural differences, but it is hugely important, and I'm glad you hit on that.
Other questions for Richard?
I have a question. Usually there's always stories about how young these players that are signed out of the Dominican Republic and the scandals that occurred in the past with that. What is the what is the age gap that you focus on to sign players, and how old can they get before you decide if they're over 19 or 20 years old, you don't want to sign them because the prospect is not going to be good?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there have been, I guess the international industry has had difficulties. It's been a lot better over the last handful of years. MLB's done a tremendous job with adding some oversight across the league and the industry, which is great. And we also pride ourselves on always doing the right thing in an industry that sometimes can be difficult with just in different countries. It can be difficult and challenging, and we always pride ourselves on always making sure we're doing the right thing. So with your question, the second part of your question about the age and how old is sort of too old, you know, every team sort of has their own philosophies. There's no one age. I think it's in combination with who that player is and what his history has been. You know, if it's a player that we've known for a long time and have a great amount of history on him, and he's 19, you know, and we hadn't signed him still, like it's probably not a player that fits our organization. At the same time, if he's someone that's new and something's changed and, you know, that's we didn't know about before, and he's new, like that player still may be worth getting to know. The bulk of the money in the industry, frankly, is spent on the kids that are just becoming eligible, and the 16-year-olds, because they're the new ones in, you know, they're new, they haven't been eligible before, and so the teams are mostly focused on those younger players. But there are definitely, especially with pitchers, actually, I would say, there's a lot more pitchers that sign at older ages because they are converted outfielders, for example, who couldn't hit well enough to sign, and so therefore, and they had a good arm, and they switched over to pitching. So a lot of the pitchers that sign are of older on average compared to the hitters.
Richard, two more chat box questions. Number one, do you scout the Australian Baseball League?
So yeah, the ABL, we actually had a scout in Australia until a couple of years ago. We parted ways with him at some point, but there weren't a ton of players coming out there every year. There's a couple players. We see them actually better when they come to the States and they face better competition here. I know you might be talking about the professional Australian Baseball League, which is older than the 16, 17-year-old kids, and we don't actually scout that league specifically. But in Australia, they have a handful of players every year that come, and we see them in spring training in Florida and Arizona.
Okay. Second question. How will the reduction of minor league teams impact international operations?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thankfully, the Dominican leagues will not be reduced. So we have 2 teams set to play in the Dominican Summer League this coming year, as we were going to have set for last year. So that will stay the same, which is great. We have 2 teams full of roster spots to fill, and we have a ton of great players that we signed yesterday and last year to fill those spots. So it shouldn't really impact the operations in that way yet. At some point, you know, with fewer spots available in the system, as you move up, I can see there's a possibility of a downstream effect where, like, hey, like maybe we shouldn't be signing as many players, but right now we're in an okay spot. So that's a good question. We'll sort of have to see how that plays out. And player development obviously has a huge impact on that as well, and collaborate really well with them too. So really good question.
Good. Other questions?
I have one off the wall. Has the team, Indians or any other team, looked at the demographics of the city they're in and say, well, what's the biggest ethnic groups in the city, and should we try to get a player like that would appeal to that fan base, which we maybe never got a lot of fans to attend games on. I'm of Croatian ancestry, and there's all kinds of famous American baseball players of Croatian descent, starting with Roger Maris, Mickey Lolich, Emil Verban, who the Chicago Fan Club is named after. There's great athletes in Croatia that go into mostly basketball and soccer. Have you ever thought about trying to explore in Eastern Europe to try to see if it's worth spending the money to develop talent out there?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I honestly hadn't really thought about that. It is a great idea though, and I appreciate you asking the question. We hadn't. I don't think we've really thought about it in that way. But hopefully that is something we can do. You know, I think you're right. Like, it would be great to get as many different people out to the park as possible, and for the more people we can bring to the park from. Because for different reasons, for connections with players from the countries of their origin, it'd be amazing. So that's a great idea.
Richard, we've got a question from the chat box about Richard the person and your background in baseball. What was your first job in baseball, and what got you to the Cleveland Indians? I know a little bit from reading your LinkedIn. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short, but I went to undergrad and did a biochemistry undergrad in Canada, in Western Canada, and ended up not doing anything to do with that, and went to the Dominican Republic and just volunteered at a sort of a showcase agency that was helping to showcase the players to the big league teams. I took a video camera essentially and helped with video. And from there, I actually just happenstance had an interview with the Yankees and got an internship doing video at their player development complex in the Dominican Republic. After that, I went to grad school back at UMass Amherst, and then went right back to the Dominican after that, and helped out at that same showcase agency. And being sort of this one Canadian kid running around the Dominican Republic stands out a little bit. It's a smaller country. It's sort of like running around one city or two cities, and everyone sort of gets to know you, and you get to know people. And I made a couple of connections through doing that, and had an interview. The Indians were sort of redoing their international operations at the end of 2015, and there was an opportunity to interview, and thankfully they called to let me talk to them, and it worked out, thankfully.
And you did stop by the Orioles for a brief bit, did you not?
Yeah, so in between grad school, when I was interning, in between grad school years, when I was interning in the north of Boston, I was just helping out as like an associate scout at the league I was watching.
Okay. Someone would like to know, did that graduate degree help you any?
Yes, I think in graduate degrees in general, it doesn't necessarily have to be the content that you learn. Like, I don't necessarily have to know how to balance a budget or whatever it might be, but at the same time, there were a lot of benefits to grad school as a whole, I think, just in terms of growing up and sort of feeling, understanding how people think and leadership skills and of the sorts. A lot of the non-tangibles definitely helped me in relationship building, and people I met while there have helped me tremendously, and wouldn't be where I am today without having gone to grad school, no doubt.
Question is, before the pandemic, it was going to games an important part of your job jar?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, I was actually on the road in either Dominican, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela about half the time. And it was, hitting the road with the scouts, collecting information, getting to know players, spending time with our guys down there, supporting them. And obviously now with the pandemic, it's zero. Haven't been on an airplane since March. So, which is good for family, and at the same time you miss it a little bit. So, but yeah, it was about half the time on the road and half the time in Cleveland.
Okay, another
I have
question.
an off-the-wall question.
Go ahead, Dave.
There's a Twitter account that's at Indians Pro that covers the international signings and international players. Is that somebody from the organization, or do you know about this account? Or
Yeah, it's not from the organization. I actually don't know who the person is, but he does get a lot of information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have another question from the chat box, and let me again just read it so it'll be accurately given to you. With having a limited bonus pool to spend, how do the Indians balance going after only a few high-priced players compared to signing more players in the 300 to 500K range? It seems like the Indians typically take the latter approach.
Yeah, that's a great question. So every year, it's the player pool that's available to sign is a little bit different, meaning that our team, our organization sort of values players in that pool a little bit differently. And with a very fluid market and teams able to commit to players anytime, any day from any class, players are being committed, but for the 2022 signing period already, and could happen today or tomorrow, for example, and we don't necessarily have access to that player anymore. So the pool of players that we're picking from is ever changing, and we value those players differently depending on the year and who that player is. So I'm saying all that just because it sort of depends on the year how we spend our money.
Okay.
Some years there may be players that we value really highly, over $1 million, and I think typically every year I've been here, we've spent over $1 million on at least one player. I think last year we spent $1.5 million on one player, and the rest were in the lower range, and that was sort of an odd year compared to the other years. So it really does depend on the player pool, but it's typically we do go after or end up signing a guy that's at least over $1 million.
So here's another chat box question, which I think will be a nice get off the stage question. I want to thank you, Richard, for spending the time with us today. It's been very insightful, but here's the question. Again, I'll read it. There is a lot of buzz about the Indians' lower minor leaguers anchored by a strong international group. How soon do you think it will be until these players reach the majors?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. It's great, and it means a lot because our guys work really hard for that, and it's sort of showing up right now in the low minors, like you mentioned, which is really exciting. I would preach patience. As mentioned, these guys sign at 16 years old. If you think of the guys that internationally, like Soto and Vladimir Guerrero, those guys made it uber quickly to the big leagues at 19, 20 years old, which is super rare. Typically, these guys, have to work their way through the system, the DSL, Arizona, A-ball, AA, AAA, and get up there. So it'll be a number of years before some of the guys that we just signed will sort of reach the upper levels. For the guys that you guys have probably already heard about, like guys like Rocchio and Valera, Bracho, Tena, Gabriel Rodriguez, some of those guys are a little bit closer, a few steps closer. So I would still say there's a couple of years out, but things can change. The minor leagues are changing, and there are fewer affiliates. So I'm not sure exactly how that'll affect those guys, but hopefully we'll start seeing those names in the next couple of years from the international scene.
Okay, well again, Richard, we thank you. You've spent a very insightful 30 minutes plus with us, and we appreciate not only you being here, but you being so willing to step in at the 11th hour and be a great closer for a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's my pleasure, and you guys had great questions, so I appreciate it.
Great. All right. Well, we have a couple brief things to talk about before we successfully close out today. We have a person who I think is still there with us, Scott Jarrett, and Scott's one of our SABR members who's writing a book about the 10-cent beer night that remains hung out there in Cleveland Indians history. And he's looking for people to talk with. And if you're one of those 200,000 people who were rumored to have been at the game that night, he'd like to talk with you. So with that, Scott, would you like to say just a few words?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I'm in Austin, Texas, but I grew up in Tiffin, Ohio, big Indians fan. And it's just been I'm a middle school journalism teacher It's been a lot of fun. I feel like no one's ever really written a book that just kind of focuses on that infamous night. And so I've gotten to talk to a variety of people. It's been a lot of fun. Like I've talked to Milt Wilcox, Jack Brohammer, Lenny Randall, Tom Grieve, some people in Indians promotional history who were involved with it. So I'm just, kind of just canvassing. As you mentioned, it's one of those things in Indians lore of where a lot of people, I think, claim they were there and or knew someone was there who was there, and it's an interesting story. I guess as it's expanded, I've kind of gotten interested in the promotional angle of it, and how the Indians actually were really trying to save baseball in Cleveland. So it's interesting that earlier you kind of made reference to some dallying with the Indians actually doing the unthinkable of leaving Cleveland. But in the early 70s, I guess that was a possibility, and different cities were interested. And then of course there was the idea of moving some of the games to New Orleans, et cetera. So they really had a bold goal in 1974 to have 1 million fans. And they actually reached that number, but so 10 Cent Beer Night was just one of many promotions in 1974. So it's been a lot of fun, and if you have any thoughts or any input, I'd love anything, and happy to go down a lot of different rabbit holes. It's a lot of fun.
Could you put your email address in the chat box?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yep.
How much was beer regularly at the stadium in 1974?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know that. Yeah, I don't know if I've come across what that amount would have been. That's a good thing to try to find out. I'm going to write that one down. That's a good thing to.
Wikipedia says 65 cents.
65?
About 65 cents.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah.
Scott, I would suggest that you talk to Jim Clark. He's the radio broadcaster for the Akron Rubber Ducks.
Yes. Yeah, and I have that book, and I'd love to. Yeah, do you think if I just write to the team, I can get a hold of him?
Yes, I'll try to find something and send you something.
Okay. Yeah.
Good.
I have his book and I'm enjoying it, where he kind of chronicles that. I think it's called Rally Around Cleveland, which is
correct.
And I enjoy it. Yeah. Okay.
Are you going to participate in our book club next week?
I could. I'd love to. Yeah.
If I see you there, I'll try to remember to get you his email address.
Okay. Thank you.
I have his email address. I can send it to you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
One last thing. I guess that one of the aspects that I've come across, and if anyone has any thoughts about it and you want to email me, is the radio DJ who kind of got everyone fired up ahead of time. And I'm sorry, I can't.
Pete Franklin.
Yeah, Pete Franklin.
Pete Franklin.
If anyone has thoughts about him, he definitely apparently kind of figured in.
We don't have enough time to discuss Pete Franklin.
That's worth a book by itself.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for bringing this topic, and I think you got some connectivity here today. And
absolutely,
we hope we see you again in future meetings to keep us updated.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Can I interject? I have a personal experience in 10 Cent Beer Night. My sister graduated from Euclid High School
in 1974, and the graduation ceremony was down at Cleveland Public Hall. So we're there in Cleveland Public Hall watching her get her diploma. And as it's over, we come out the side door out to the mall, and then there's melee going on, and we didn't know what was going on with all these people flooding out from Municipal Stadium and smoking everything all over the place. It took a while before we found out that I thought they were all trying to get us Euclid High graduate alumni or something. Never
right.
forget that as long as I live.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Scott. One last thing, a brief advertisement for the second part of our two-part winter meeting. It will be on Saturday, and I'll send you an email with all this, but just kind of a little bit of an advertisement. It will be on Saturday, February 20th from 1 to 3. It's going to have a little bit more of a research flavor. We have Dr. Meredith Wells, former NASA scientist who has reinvented herself to be a baseball researcher, doing some hardcore research under the topic of what's happened to our baseball over the last few years that might have contributed to the rapid explosion in home runs. She's presented at a number of conferences, including the SABR Analytics Conference, and she's got some new information, and we may be one of the first groups to see that. So she will be one of our speakers. We're also having a SABR researcher from Victoria, British Columbia, Gary Belleville, talking about how he, and this was advertised recently on the SABR website, uncovered a no-hitter by a Cleveland pitcher that heretofore had been not really well understood, if understood at all. So I've spoken with Gary, and he's very excited about being part of our chapter meeting. And then our third topic will be of course, it's gotten a lot of interest, and that's the bringing the Negro League data and the Negro League players into the mainstream as far as their records count equally with MLB records. And we have Michael Lynch and Gary Ashwell from Seamheads. And it's Seamheads who's rightfully gotten the recognition and the acknowledgement for doing this research on this data and bringing it forward and making it available for the community writ large. And Michael and Gary are going to, by their words, bring an agnostic view, what they've done, what they've unearthed, how they've done it, and how they've contributed. And I think they're fascinating guys to talk to, and I think it will be very enjoyable for us. And then we'll close with our board of directors chair, Mark Armoire, who has recently stood up a SABR task force on this topic. And Mark would like to share some perspectives on how SABR is entering this very important topic area and what SABR will be doing going forward. So I think we're set up for a great second meeting. You'll get the information. We hope you will be able to come. And I think if you're like me, you'd like to know more about the Negro Leagues in advance of February 20th. And turns out on February 13th, there is a Black Baseball Chronology presentation being given by one of the friends of chapter who is still with us today, Ike Brooks. And Ike, I was wondering if you could be our closing speaker in that sense of just a few words on what that's all about. And we will get information out to all of you on this opportunity so you can sign up for it if you're interested. Ike?
Oh, thank you, Joe. And good to see everyone. And Herb Moss, it's good to see you also. And hopefully I'll see you later this year. But just a matter of background, last year I partnered with the Josh Gibson Foundation from Western Pennsylvania and the Community Cup Classic Foundation and Lifeline Sports here in Northeast Ohio in delivering 12 presentations commemorating the centennial of Negro League Baseball. Needless to say, some of that was waylaid because of the pandemic. Those groups have chosen to continue some of that programming during this year. And on February 13th, which is coincidental to the actual date 101 years ago of the formation of the first formal Negro League, there'll be a presentation of the timeline of Black baseball. Certainly invite all of you to participate. It could act as somewhat of a primer. I'm sure most of you already know everything about Black baseball. But those who may have an interest in learning a little more, feel free to tune in. Joe has promised to send out the registration link for that program and that entire series of programs. And we'd love to see you there. And by the way, Herb, just for your sake, I do a presentation on Luke Easter, and you get all of the props for coming up with most of the information that I use. And that'll be done during October with the Josh Gibson Foundation.
Ike, what's your jacket you're wearing?
Oh, this is my fraternity jacket, Phi Beta Sigma. I start out slowly on the Phi Beta, so all of you will think I'm real smart, and then I say Sigma.
Oh, I see, Kappa. Oh, I get it.
Oh, wow. We busted the budget by hiring a comedian to come today.
Little solid on
Well, I think with that, and thank you, Ike. I think that brings us to a close on this Saturday afternoon. I hope you've all enjoyed our first part of our Jack Graney chapter winter meeting. And I'd like just to close with a thank you to all of you. I think one thing we can say is all of us have been on too many Zoom calls, and some of those Zoom calls are becoming more than ever people trying to talk over each other and getting confused and garbled and frustrated. You all were really professional in the way it came down today. So thank you so very much. And again, I hope you have enjoyed today, and I hope we will see you February 20th. So with that, all of you, stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Great job. Thank you.
Very good meeting.
Good day.